All right, you've got a logo. You've got a website. What more do you need? Nonprofit branding is a fickle mistress because, like any good house, it takes a lot of time and energy into cleaning and maintaining it so it always looks its best. You wouldn't buy a house and then never clean it or redecorate it, would you? Yet so many professionals, not just in the nonprofit sector, think of branding as something only those weird, angsty marketing people worry about. Well, let me tell you, I am angsty. And it's because I know that in most cases, your logo and branding is done once at your inception and then managed side of desk by whoever the youngest or most aesthetically friendly person in the office is. Do not lie to me. I know that this is true. Compared to all of your other million and one things that need your attention, who cares how a social graphic looks or whether your image is properly sized for web? But that answer is me. That angsty marketer who knows that your nonprofit's brand is more than just a simple graphic icon alongside your name on marketing materials. It's the essence of who you are and what you stand for, and it helps you build trust and forge relationships with your audience of donors, supporters, and stakeholders. Your organization's brand should be apparent and consistent, trust me, that's a big one that we run into, on everything from your website, social media channels, direct mailouts, email marketing, signage, and pretty much everything that you create or do that will be seen by the public eye. But more than that, a brand also has to do with how you run your campaigns and even ties into your organization's overall culture. No pressure. And a well-designed nonprofit branding strategy can make all the difference. Specifically, when creating an effective branding strategy, it's important to develop a set of guidelines or rules that everyone on your team can follow, both now and into the future when your team expands with new hires. This should be their guiding star to getting to know the organization. And your brand guide should contain some of the following components. A mission statement, so what your organization is all about, what you hope to achieve, and most importantly, what your unique value proposition is. Your logos and any of their variations. So what variations are allowed? You'll see on screen the example of the various Kilo logos that we use. Your tagline. What does your brand represent and how can you express it in the fewest possible words? We currently have two right now, which is let your story do the fundraising and reach, raise, repeat. If you prefer one over the other, please let us know because we are having a very tough time deciding. It should also contain your writing style. So what is your brand's tone of voice and how do you express yourself? Include any specific spellings you use, words for calls to action, and any phrasing you actively try to avoid. And this can get as granular as what titles, abbreviations, numbers, symbols, quotes, and even citations that you're allowed to use. Your color palette, what colors describe your brand, what emotions you're trying to convey. And again, this should be maintained consistently across all platforms. Fonts, what family of fonts you use, and again, when do you allow for any variations? And finally, the types of approved imagery. This involves sizes, formats, multimedia, different types of multimedia, anything your organization would accept. And so while all of these things are undoubtedly important, I'm conscious that I only have around 30 minutes of your time to try and instill about an entire career's worth of information. So we're going to go off the base assumption that you're happy with your organization's name and tagline. You have a functional logo. You've got a strong mission statement that helps shape how you speak to your supporters, and you don't use Comic Sans as your typography. Now, if you're sitting here in a panic knowing that you currently use Comic Sans, first of all, it's okay. We've all been there. But seriously, please stop. Leave this webinar, change your font, and watch the recording later. No, just kidding. Don't do that. But do please change it as soon as possible. And I'm also going to be giving you a resource on building a brand guide that covers all of these elements so you can create a living, breathing document that will evolve as your brand naturally does over time. And I'll make sure the link to that is sent out in the follow-up email. However, today, over the next 25 to 30 minutes, depending on how fast I talk, we're going to be speaking mainly about the last three components and how it ties into a strong email marketing brand. Hopefully, you'll leave this session with the confidence and know-how to create a quick and dirty style guide that will help you craft beautiful, consistent, accessible emails every time. So obviously, writing great, inspiring email content is an essential building block of any successful email campaign, but it does go pretty hand in hand with email design. And so far from being an afterthought, email design is actually what makes your content shine. A well-designed email is more readable and effective at catching the reader's eye, and it makes your brand more memorable. And this is important because when your readers remember you, not only will they open your emails, but they will also come to enjoy reading them. I assume you all receive our weekly newsletter, eagerly awaiting it in your inbox every Friday, am I right? You'll know it right away from the consistent subject line weekly alert and David's telltale prose. The man is a way with words, what can I say? And his consistency and deliverability of a good email every week shows in his metrics. So if you want to boost your email engagement rates, you must consider email design. And to consider email design, you're going to have to put some parameters in place. An email style guide outlines the standards for the visual appearance of your emails and the messaging used in them. These standards are meant to align the brand look and feel and tone of your email marketing program with all the other communications and marketing materials your organization puts out into the world. And because, trust me, it can be far too easy to deviate from the brand guide when dabbling in emails. These are all emails sent in Keela by different people. And while they're similar, they're definitely not what we would consider on brand. Think of your style guide like the guardrails in bowling. They're there to keep you focused, headed in the right direction, with more of a chance of getting a strike. Or in this case, converting a new donor, retaining a recurring donor, or deepening the trust with your pool of supporters. And so ensuring brand alignment across channels isn't just a nuance that only that marketing or creative team notices. As much as it might seem like your marketing manager yelling at you about font choices and color schemes, I promise it does make a difference. In fact, research reveals that your brand consistency has a direct impact on your supporters' experience and your bottom line. 50% of donors expect great design and cross-channel consistency. 63% said that a consistent brand experience influences whether they convert on online donation forms. And on average, the consistent brand presentation increases donation revenue by 23%. Luckily, building a strong email brand needn't cost you a penny, dear listeners. With some creative thinking and simple design principles, it's actually pretty easy to build an instantly recognizable brand personality that your supporters will be happy to engage with. So we're going to go over the 5 basic principles of email branding and provide some examples of what to do and especially what not to do, so that by the end, you'll be able to add branding strategists to one of the many hats you already wear in your organization's day-to-day. So I want to get a feel for who I'm speaking to today, and I'm going to start with a few polls that I'll ask Elsie to launch just to get to know you all a little bit better. I would launch them myself, but my computer's in French, and trust me, it's fine when I've got a minute, but if I have to do something on the fly, it's very stressful.
That's amazing. Your whole computer is in French?
It sounds great, again, until you have to present a webinar and your whole
Fair
Zoom is in
enough.
French. All right, our first poll is, and I'll let you have a couple minutes to answer it, is how confident are you in your design skills? And so I see we've got about half the people have answered, half the people. All right, and overwhelmingly, you know what looks good, but not how to do it yourself. Same, that's why we have Chelsea. So I'll give you just one more second. We're at 91%. I'm a stickler for 100%. If you're not voting, I'm watching you.
Got 2 more. That might be Nicole and Chelsea, to be honest.
Very fair. Fine.
Chelsea's Picasso, of course.
For sure. All right. All right, so I've shared those results there. So like I said, overwhelming majority of you know what looks good, but not how to do it yourself.
Yeah, you can feel it, right? I always get that feeling when I'm like, oh, that's a banger email. But as soon as I'm sitting down, no, it's gone. Comic Sans.
All right, and then we've got one more poll.
Let me launch that one.
Thank you so much. Oof. Does your nonprofit have a brand guide? It's great that it's like a horse race at a carnival. So most people are saying yes, which is good. I'm very happy with that result. Most people are saying yes. About 35% said no, and then 10% unsure. That's totally fine. You know what? Even regardless of this answer, this webinar is going to instill some creativity and some inspiration to either start or revamp your brand guide, or find your brand guide if you're not sure if you have one.
Absolutely. And you're going to send out a really awesome resource about it too. Spoiler alert, I'm sure you're going to mention it later, but for the folks who say no, you're in good hands. Promise me. I promise you. All right. I'll go back on mute now.
All right. Elsie, do you want to close this poll? Because I don't know how to get rid of it.
Oh, I did. I thought I closed it.
Oh, you did.
Oh, hang on. Let me share the results and then stop sharing. There we go.
We got this. We're super professional.
I feel like Zoom changes every week. Something new's happening. Okay. Brilliant. We're good to go.
All right, perfect. Polls aside, so each design principle we're going to talk about today are going to touch on 3 main pillars because your ultimate goal is to craft a style guide that's accessible, engaging, and consistent. And so what I mean is accessible means focusing on design accessibility, which essentially allows people who experience disabilities to access the web more equally. Creating accessible design means ensuring you've made your content as consumable as possible for people with blindness, visual impairments, or other neurodiversity issues. And every choice down to the font you pick is meaningful. Engaging is when you create a look and feel that welcomes people in rather than pushes people away. And consistent. So whatever your end product is, it's important that it matches your overall brand so that people can recognize you, whether they're on your website, reading your emails, or seeing you in person at events. So first things first, let's start with your color palette. Your organization's color palette should be chosen with care and should consider more than just what looks nice together. The jumping point of your color palette is, you guessed it, your logo. For example, at Keela, you all know our brand color is purple, but not everything we put out into the world is dressed head to toe in purple like Marie from Breaking Bad. We use a suite of colors ranging from green to yellow to purple, chosen painstakingly by our designers to make sure we had the perfect combination of colors that stood out, meshed well together, and didn't hurt your eyes. These are what we recycle in everything from the emails you read to the blogs you all hopefully consume. However, without a designer on your team, I can imagine this could cause quite a bit of anxiety. Don't worry, Elsie's going to show you a nifty tool in a bit that will help you create a color palette automatically based on the primary color of your logo. But as you venture off after this webinar and explore the various possible color palettes, be sure to consider the following. What emotions are associated with each color? Studies show that different colors have different psychological effects on viewers, which is certainly something you'd want to consider when designing your organization's color palette. For example, reds tend to personify bold emotions like passion or strength and anger, while blues often lean towards peace and trust and competence. Since your nonprofit doesn't exist in a vacuum, it's a good idea to consider the other widely known color palettes of existing organizations and causes, as well as ones that operate in similar spaces. For example, pinks are typically associated with breast cancer awareness, with blues and reds often tied to political parties. And depending on your mission, there may even be a set of colors typically associated with that sector. For example, conservation-based organizations tend to choose green-heavy palettes, while healthcare organizations might skew towards hues of red. And you're not obligated to follow suit with your cause, but it can certainly function as a useful jumping-off point. And it's good to note that while most organizations will choose a core color with secondary palette of accompanying hues, technically there are no limits to the colors you can choose to include. Although I wouldn't recommend getting too crazy because you run the risk of overwhelming and confusing the heck out of your reader. Big kudos to the customer care team who created some of our worst offender type emails for us to go through today in our presentation. What's most important is that your palette meets color contrast and other accessibility standards so that people can see and interact with color in ways that work for them. Now, I'm not going to lie, pals, I've seen one too many red and lime green emails with white text get sent through Keela for me to let this slide. Stop. Not only does it hurt my eyes, but it makes it nearly impossible for someone who's vision impaired to read it. And with an estimated 300 million people who are colorblind in the world, making designs accessible to those people is important. Contrary to popular belief, most people who are colorblind can actually see color, just not in the way that others can. And so there are three main types of color blindness. There's red-green color blindness, blue-yellow, and then complete color blindness. And I'll show you what I mean. Here's someone who has a red-green color blindness. This is what they would see. So if you're the perpetrator of a red and lime green email combo, then this is what some of your readers may be seeing instead. And to be honest, I think probably looks a little bit better than the red and lime green, but still, stop. There are a few certain color combinations you can avoid as a good rule of thumb, and they include red and green and brown, blue and purple, etc. So here's an image you can screenshot or reference later when you're deciding on your color palettes, and some good starting guidelines for contrasting colors. Because visual impairments cover such a large spectrum, creating designs that are accessible for people who suffer from vision loss is not a one-size-fits-all solution. But there are some tips you can use to make sure that the most people possible can enjoy and understand your material. Tip number one is choose contrasting colors for text and background. Wherever possible, try to use a lighter color for your background and a darker color for your text. And most definitely avoid using pattern backgrounds. Number two is use a dark overlay when displaying text over images. If you're putting text on an image, especially one that doesn't have a lot of blank space, you're going to want to make it stand out. And you can do that by adding a gradient box like in the example on the slide. Tip number three is use color and underlines for links instead of relying on color alone. So make sure your links stand out. These are your calls to action. They're the reason why you're sending this email. You want people to visit your site, read a story, sign up to volunteer. So make sure you use a different color and an underline to signify those importance. And finally, if you're stressed to the max, wondering whether you've chosen your colors all wrong, don't worry. Of course, there's an app for that. Number four is use an online color blindness and contrast checker like Stark, which I will, again, link out in the follow-up email. And here is our first shift where I'm going to pass it to Elsie, and she's going to show you some of these things within Keela.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. You've given me a lot to go on, which I appreciate. Okay, so here is a website that I found because I have a lot of trouble with this. I have seen my fair share of lime green backgrounds on emails with red text, but to be honest, I have been a perpetrator of this. I'm not very creatively inclined, artistically design inclined. I think I'm more of a writer maybe, if that. But I have to create a lot of material in my job, and something that has really, really helped me is this website. It's called Coolers. It has been my saving grace. So it's a website that allows you to sort of view and generate color palettes and get their sort of relevant color codes so that you can plug them directly into Keela or anywhere else you need on your website and things like that. So I'll make sure it's included in the follow-up email. So I'll just show you what it looks. So I'll go ahead and I'll start the generator. And what it does automatically is it gives you a sort of randomly generated color palette. Ooh, it's very dark and mysterious. So you can just, by clicking the space bar, I can just cycle through these random palettes until I find something that feels right to me. And often I do this not to actually get the color palettes, but to learn a little bit more about what colors look good together, because I'm definitely on that I have no idea what I'm doing side when it comes to colors. So this has been really helpful for me to cycle through. And something that's really cool is if you get to a color that you like. So for example, I really like the kind of pinkish hues we've got. They're nice and pastel and they're quite easy on the eyes. I can lock these in place. So let's lock those. And then I can continue cycling through until I get the last two colors that look good for me. So I'm like, okay, that sounds lovely. It's very Tiffany Valentine's Day-esque at the moment. It's completely random, so I didn't know what I was going to get. Another thing is if you think, okay, let's look at what Sam was saying about contrasting colors. We really want to make sure that we've got those contrasting colors in this palette. What you can do is change the shade itself. So by coming in here, maybe I want to get a really bright pink, and then perhaps I want to replace this with a really, really soft violet. So those are two really nice contrasting colors that we can play around with. And of course, at the bottom, you can get the hex color code and you can get the RGB codes as well, and you can copy those. Now, I think, to be honest, when I first started, I think I was one of their earliest users, and we used to be able to save these. But now, of course, they've released a pro version because they need to make money. I just copy these into a Word document, and I've got it's my style guide, so I can copy and paste it. So I probably only come back to Coolers once every month, and then just have a document that I'm working off with all these screenshots and codes. So that's sort of a way to start if you have no idea where you're going, or if you're creating something completely new that doesn't have a sort of precedent or doesn't have a template to go off. That can be something you work on. But of course, as Sam said, you probably have a logo, and that can be a really great way to begin sort of going from out there. So what we can do up here in tools, I was in the palette generator there, but I can actually use this image picker tool, and I can upload an image into here and pull out colors from the color palette. So let me find a logo I've been using in my tests. We'll go ahead and we'll take a look at that. And so now what it does is it picks out the palette colors, the main colors from the logo, and sort of makes that one for you. So you can cycle through as well based on kind of areas. It'll move around, pick different pictures, especially if you've got quite a complex logo. You can pull out those colors. And so what I'm kind of aiming for here is one really bright color, this pink, and some sort of softer colors like these colors in here, so that there's going to be a variation. So I'm thinking this one looks pretty good. What I'm going to do is I've already copied the hex codes from this, but what you would do in this case is just open it in the generator, and then you can even play around with it in here and change the shades if you want. So let's open it in the generator. And then I would just copy those hex codes and those RGB numbers straight over to a Word document, and I've got it for life. So let's use it in practice. Let me take this back to an email marketing template that I've been working on and show you how I would use that then. So Sam talked a little bit about accessibility and the things that we want to focus on. And if I've learned one thing about building an email that has absolutely surprised me, it's that less is more. Despite what my instincts would tell me, the simpler your email is, the more complex emails tend to look sort of not as professional in my experience. So I keep it very, very simple, and we have simple templates in Keela that you can use that are sort of structurally very simple, and you come in and you just plug your colors in. And when you're putting in these colors, instead of using these sort of background colors for each content section, I just completely ignore that and I jump straight to style. I think it's sort of a really great way to look at this is to just look at the header, look at the body, and look at the footer, and style in that way, color in that way. So let me grab my hex code. I think what I'm going to do is have the header and the footer be a really bright poppy color. So we'll go in here and I'm going to go back. So I want the header. I'm going to use that really bright pinky peach color. And I'll jump down here and I'll use, oh, what am I doing? Style. I'm jumping down to the footer. Let's pop it in there. Oh, sorry, I did not paste that at all. There we go. Now I need to change that text. It has to be contrasting. So I'm going to switch that to a white. Oh, I've got to highlight it first and white. And there we go. And you know what? Maybe in the middle, I might change this, just this one. I might make that pink as well. Now, if you wanted to, I could take that really pale kind of paley white color here. That's sort of a little beigey pink. I could put that in the background if I wanted to. Maybe I will, just to show you that. So if I wanted to, I could change the body to be that. Where is the body there? Oops, sorry, I did not paste that, copy that at all. There we go. Sorry, I'm moving my keys, my Control-C, way too quick for me. So you see now it's just a slight hint of color. So I would never go any harder than that. And to be honest, I think it's not necessary. So you can see here what I mean by keeping it simple. I've got color there. In my mind, instinctually, I think more color is better. But to be honest, if I head back to just white, I think it looks a lot cleaner, a lot more accessible. So that's sort of how I would work with that, how I would use the color palettes. Now, of course, you might have a logo that isn't particularly colorful, or perhaps you find that the logo doesn't have the most exciting colors. Maybe you're not wanting to have the same color every week. You can also, another thing I've seen used is people uploading images. So let me browse an image here, and then taking a color palette from that and having that be the theme of the email every week. So I wouldn't use this for your weekly newsletter or your monthly newsletter. Make sure that's consistent. But if you're sending out just one announcement, perhaps you want to theme the color of the email from that as well. So that's a way for you to still have a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of flexibility, while still making sure that your newsletters and your weekly emails are consistent. So that's my practical pro tip there. Back to you, Sam.
All right, and I'll just get my screen back up. All right, thanks, Elsie. Okay, design principle number 2 is the F word. Fonts. Sheesh. So your nonprofit's typography expresses your organization's personality through written elements of your brand and how your copy is styled and arranged. So this includes things like typefaces, stylization, and hierarchy. Side note, have you ever wondered what font reflects your personality? BuzzFeed told me that I was Futura because I am sleek and a total individual. I recommend taking their self-affirming 2014 quiz if you need some font inspiration. Back to business. So typefaces are families of related fonts that can vary based on a text size, weight, slope, and more. Stylization is the way your text is formatted, such as capitalization. So are you okay with using shouty caps, or would you prefer a more calm and gentle approach in your communications? And hierarchy is simply the different sizes of your fonts and how you direct the reader's eye. But don't be deceived, fonts can be tricky. When a brand tries to be too unique with their fonts, their efforts often backfire. Just think of all the people who use, again, I'm picking on it, Comic Sans to be a bit more fun, but end up unintentionally nauseating everybody who reads their emails. In most cases, fonts that are simple but bold do the trick. They allow the copy to stand out so your most important messages and calls to action are clear and draw your reader in without impairing their ability to read the text. These are known as accessible fonts, but that doesn't mean everything has to be in Times New Roman. You can still have fun with fonts as long as that fun is done in a safely supervised manner. For example, if your nonprofit speaks with a loud advocacy-based tone, a strong vertical typeface in bold weights may convey urgency and action. On the other hand, a children's charity might use a more geometric typeface with a lighter weight to convey a calmer tone. Keela uses a fun font for our logo, which is Lex and Deca, and sticks to good old plain Jane accessible Roboto for all of our other communications. That way, dyslexic or vision impaired readers who have trouble with text will easily be able to process our information without having to think too hard about what the letters look like, no matter what size they are. Here's a general rule of thumb. Stick to sans serifs for body text and anything that you want your audience to pause and read, and that you can get fun and experiment with other fonts for logos, headers, or other shorter pieces of text. But Sam, a font is a font is a font. How am I supposed to know the difference between a serif and a sans serif? Great question. Besides sounding like a medieval weapon, a serif style font is really just a font that has those additional little flourishes at the top and bottom of those letters, whereas a sans serif are the ones without them. Again, my French, sans serif. Depending on the typeface, these fonts can be difficult to read. Letters may run together, even touching each other in smaller sizes. And so for this reason, serif fonts are more commonly used for headings because it's a larger font size, whereas easier to read fonts should and could be used for larger chunks of text or anything that's below size 16 points. An important thing to note when picking your font is avoiding ones with misleading shapes or characters that could be mistaken for other things. An uppercase I, number 1, and lowercase l, for instance, are a couple that come to mind. When in doubt, you can't go wrong with fonts like Helvetica, Calibri, Arial, Times New Roman, Tahoma, Source Sans Pro, Rockwell, and Roboto, which is Keela's choice of font. And I've got some accessible font choosing tips for you here, starting with number 1, which is do not go below size 12. And in fact, use 16 as a starting point and be kind to us old folks who can't see those teeny tiny letters anymore. Number 2 is to use short, simple sentences and bulleted lists. Information is much easier to read and digest if you're only including the most relevant pieces of information. It makes it easier to understand if you're vision impaired and easier to skim if you're not. Next is organize information into sections with large, easily readable headings. And again, that's the same reason as before. And finally, avoid using italics. Italics are meant to be used for emphasis, but you're not emphasizing every word in your sentence. That would be silly. Save it for those really special moments. Chef's kiss. And here's where I'm going to pause and send it back to Elsie.
Thanks, Sam. For those of you wondering, I know you're all very curious. My font in that same BuzzFeed quiz was Helvetica because I am a supreme overlord of any room without having to say a word. I think they're all just very self-affirming answers. I don't think there's going to be a bad one in there. All right, let me share my screen. Yes, I'm going to take from you. And everyone should be seeing Keela here. Now, everything that Sam has just said is we've sort of used in practice with Keela. So if I jump back in, let's go to, I want to go to layout. And when I'm looking in this text block specifically, you can see here I've got a really big bold heading. It's very, very stark. It's very dark and black, very contrasting to its background. That's going to show the hierarchy. And I have that in my newsletters as well. I make sure that there's sort of always a big headings for each section. And when you look at our font families, we've got all of the classics in here. So every font that we have in here is going to be readable by any email provider. Sometimes in the product portal, we get requests from folks to be able to upload their own font in here, or perhaps one that has been specifically created for their organization. And while those fonts can be used online, you can use your own fonts when you're sort of working online. Actually, it can be detrimental when you're using it in an email because it might be possible that the email provider that you're sending it to doesn't actually have that font. And so your font in that case would default to Arial anyway. So what we've done is we've limited these fonts to be accessible or all that are available, in email providers. So you know you're always going to get what you're looking for. The highlighted sort of fonts that we have in here that I recommend using is Arial, the classic, Arial, not Comic Sans apparently. Only learnt that recently that it's a no-no. Helvetica, my font. We've got Roboto in here, which is the one that Keela uses, and then Tahoma and Times New Roman and Verdana are some really good ones. So there is method to the madness of us not sort of going ham on all the fonts that we have available. We want to make sure that they are accessible in here. Another thing to note is that the default of the sizing of text in Keela is always going to be 14px. So you're never going to be seeing sort of 12px in there, which is sort of the limit that we recommend not going under, but we keep it at 14. I find that's sort of the baseline for where you should be starting, 14. Okay, that's how we kind of incorporate those best practices in Keela. Sam, take it away.
Perfect. I'll pop my screen back up. This is so much more fun when you get to share.
It is back and forth. I like that rather than having all the theory at the start and all the practice at the end.
Exactly. Let us know if you like this style. We can do more. All right. Principle number 3 is choosing appropriate visual elements. So this can cause a lot of ruckus if not done right. And that's because humans are visual animals. We use our sight to determine objects of interest more than any other sense. But because of this, organizations need to use appealing imagery to capture the attention and engagement of your supporters. When you use images, not only do you grab your reader's attention, but you're also in the position to drive emotional connections. So it's important to curate your multimedia in a way that reflects your organization's mission. And the easiest way for me to explain this is with an example. So I'm going to show you how Global Giving chooses their photography. Oops. So from their media kit, they write, "Our project leaders and the people they serve are the heroes of global giving. Our job is to ensure that they are all represented as powerful, resilient, and equal. Not only does this reinforce our values as an organization, but it also helps shape the perception and perspective of our many audiences. We have an obligation and an opportunity to change and improve the portrayal of people in difficult circumstances, and our photos play a huge role in that." And when it comes to engaging their donor base, this approach works. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so you need to get it right. Here are some of their do's and don'ts. So we'll start with their don'ts. While images of vulnerable people may generate cash in the short term, they can actually perpetuate misconceptions that a country or its people cannot solve their own problems. Global Giving never uses photos of people who are suffering, are in vulnerable situations, or are portrayed as less than. They make sure that every single photo they use preserves the dignity of the people they are portraying. And so if you're ever unsure, a simple rule to ask yourself is, would I be happy to be portrayed this way? Now, I know we have organizations that serve a variety of communities, so I'm hoping that this example is applicable across all of them, just obviously with your own spin on it. So here are some of their do's. They include photos of hopeful faces full of genuine joy, their project themes, empowered, confident people, and this is the most important takeaway, high quality and color. So that's a big one. And I've got 3 quick accessibility best practices for you here. The first is resize and optimize images. The most popular screen resolution worldwide across both mobile and all platforms is 360 by 640. You can use 600 by 650 as long as your file size is 1 megabyte or less, because it makes it easy to see without becoming too grainy. Because your ultimate goal is to ensure that your email loads quickly with images that are still sharp. Remember, giant images will take forever to load. I have been sent one too many emails by my parents with like a 15 megabyte photo. And honestly, me, like everybody else, usually just ends up clicking away rather than waiting. What can I say? This generation is impatient. Plus, more than half of emails are open on mobile devices, and that figure is constantly growing. Don't eat up your subscribers' precious data with massive high-res images. Number 2 is add captions or alt text. So make sure to add up to 30 words of captions or alternative text to all images or graphics, because this helps someone who is vision impaired understand what the photo is all about and connect to the story you're trying to tell. And last one is use simple and easy to understand layouts consistently. The more basic your emails, as Elsie mentioned earlier, the easier they will be to compile on design on your end, as well as read and engage with on your audience's end. Now, I know that was a quick tip, but I'm going to pass it back to Elsie here. You're on mute.
Thank you, Sam.
Yep.
Okay. So I've got a lot on this one. So we have a list of optimal image dimensions here in our knowledge base. And so if I jump down to, let's go down to email marketing, we've got the headers and the images and things like that in there. So you can definitely refer to these if you're unsure about what size to put your images as. Now, having said that, there is something to know about resizing images. And I think it's something really important. I do see folks sort of run into hurdles with this. And I think it's something that I had to learn from working at Keela. So when you're resizing an image, you must ensure that the image itself, before resizing, is actually capable of being resized into the dimensions that you're aiming for without losing quality. And I think sometimes folks get frustrated because they'll try and stretch an image, or they'll try and make an image bigger, and then all of a sudden it becomes really pixelated and they don't understand why, because they're using the optimal dimensions that we've provided. So when you're viewing an image on your screen, what you're actually viewing is a bunch of little colored squares. They're called the pixels. And so when you sort of zoom into an image, you'll start to see those little pixels. So actually, let's have a look. I'll show you some examples so that we can see it real life. So if I bring this beautiful French bulldog over here, you might recognize it from some of those naughty emails that I created for Sam. This is a really, really high quality stock image. And if I zoom in, it sort of holds up. As you can see, I'm kind of moving in. We're still getting some of that, the texture of this beautiful little jumper, which is pretty incredible. But if I go over here, you can see the whiskers are starting to cave in. We're not able to see any definition of that. And that's because the whiskers rely on us moving back. They rely on the spread, the expanse of us being back here. And as we zoom in, the colors, they start to lose their integrity. If I look at another one, this sort of simple logo that I've been looking at in here, when I zoom in, you can start seeing those pixels much sooner. You can see that it starts to become blurry as I zoom in here because it's quite simple. And so if you imagine me, if I have this logo in here, it's quite small here. So everything's looking good and it's not being stretched. But if I tried to make that quite big, sort of this big, I would start to get those sort of furry amounts. And I find that a lot of the image quality, a lot of the images that we see for logos and things like that, they're really simple because simple is best. So if this happens, if you find yourself in this situation, you're wanting to resize a header image or a photo so it fits into Keela's sort of optimal parameters, but it's just not working because the quality of the image isn't good enough, or it's too high and it's being compressed, or it's too small and it's being stretched, you'll find, I think, the best solution is to recreate the image or to choose a new one. You're not ever going to be able to fit an image that doesn't have that quality into a parameter. You can't force it. And often I think it's easier just to give up, start new. And if you're creating a logo or if you're creating an image, to begin with the parameters that we have, the optimal images, so that no stretching will need to occur at all. So I think that's something that people kind of run into, and you think it's your fault. It's not. Blame the image. The image was never going to be good enough. So another thing that I want to talk about is image captions. So Sam mentioned having image captions. We have some inbuilt image card and image caption content blocks. Now, previously, you saw me change this to pink, and I have white font. But since then, I've learned that that's probably not the most accessible caption font, to be honest. If the purpose of this caption is accessibility, what I might do instead is have an even darker background to really, really hype up that contrast. So let me find a color that will be well suited for that, and I'll pop it in here and I'll show you an example of that. So that really, really pops and it makes it kind of clearer. So that's something I might think about. It may not be necessary, but if you can tip the scales in any direction towards making your emails more accessible, then definitely go for that. In terms of hierarchy and guiding the viewers down the email, you'll see that I have everything kind of stacked in one row, gliding downwards. We've got these bullet points here to guide the eye, and I've got these dividers in between that I haven't actually added any color to sort of break up the sections. We've got lots of white space in there too. So let me sort of show you how I would use that. So for this divider here, I'll jump in, I'll change the color, and I'm going to make it a little bit thicker actually. Let's make it, is 5 too thick? No, oh, maybe 4. So that's a way of guiding, of breaking up, of giving folks a kind of a break when they're reading through. Another thing to note is that we have these images kind of stacked in a row. We don't have multiple next to each other. And I'll talk a little bit more about that next in my final kind of closing remarks. But I just want you to picture it now and start thinking about it. All right, back to you, Sam, for your final kind of theory, and then I'll close out and will be question time.
Perfect. Thanks, Elsie. All right, so you've chosen your colors, you've picked an accessible font, and you've curated the multimedia elements required to send out a stellar email. Now it comes time to pull it all together. And you're going to want to do this by following visual hierarchy best practices. This is a way to rank all of your chosen design elements based on the order of visual importance. Have you ever opened an email and it's just felt a little bit off? It made you not want to read it, or you subconsciously started to tense up? That's a sign of bad visual hierarchy, and you might not even know you're turning your readers off. Good visual hierarchy allows for email subscribers to easily scan your content, absorb the needed information, and subconsciously know what you want them to do next. And it does this because your content follows natural eye movement patterns, making the experience a lot more enjoyable. So here are a few things to consider to nail your visual hierarchy. The first is to separate the header and footer from the body content and include a logo at the top of your email. Not only does this help people see straight away that this email is coming from you, but it also draws the reader's eye to the bulk of the content, which is your body, as to where they should be focusing. Tip number 2 uses everything we learned in the session about fonts. So using font size to give more importance to certain elements, again, will help draw the reader's eye to where you want it to go. Number 3 is all about white space to let your content breathe. While white space can seem like a waste of space, guess what? White space is your metaphorical wingman, and you should rely on it to make your messages look good. Also known as negative space, this is the area you see between the various visual elements in your email that have been left blank on purpose. And we love it so much because it allows our brains to interpret, scan, and break down content into easy to read info. You know, when your image or text lines up right next to the edge of the column of your email, that's like breathing down your readers' necks. Back up, my friend, give them some space. And while it can be tempting to fill up that valuable real estate with info, that clutter really turns people off, especially if they're reading your email on a mobile device. Cluttered house, cluttered mind, the same is true in email design. White spaces give an appearance of simplicity and cleanliness in a digital product or an email, which improves the perception and experience of your readers. Next is the right color scheme, which we all know how important is from design principle number 1. Remember, the fewer colors you use, the cleaner your design will look, so try to stick with 2 to 4 colors max for your email. Finally, the most important element of visual hierarchy is your call to action, or CTA. This is why you're sending the email in the first place, remember. So your CTA should be appropriately sized with white space around it so it stands out from the rest of your email. If you have primary and secondary CTAs, so sign up to volunteer or donate now, make sure to use different colors, as this will help set different priorities and guide the eye of your readers. For instance, at Keela, we use a purple button with white text for our main CTA and a white button with purple text for our secondary CTA. Lately, we've been getting spicy and using green CTA buttons. We're living life on the wild side over here. Also, keep your buttons big enough for mobile users. They should never have difficulties tapping. And I think the best part of this whole webinar is that once you complete steps 1 through 4, you're pretty much ready to sail off into the proverbial sunset on all of your future email campaigns. And that's because you really only need to create one email in your new brand style guide due to the wonderful world of templates. Most email marketing tools come with a library of ready-made templates like Keela's email marketing tool, which features templates you can modify to suit a wide range of your campaigns. Our drag and drop editor lets you add your content and change the look of emails to fit your specific goal. So once you've inputted your logo, colors, CTA, spacing, and imagery, then bam, all you got to do is clone it and update the copy the next time you need to make a new one. The key to proper email template usage is consistency. So choose a layout and stick with it, because this is the best way of building brand consistency, not to mention saving you hours of time. And the more consistent your branding, the more you build trust and loyalty with your supporters. So a quick recap, you should hopefully have a better understanding of how to choose appropriate brand colors, look for fonts everybody can read, create guidelines on what imagery best represents your organization, how to translate into a beautifully designed email, and then how you can reuse this email over and over again to build a strong, consistent brand experience. And here's where I'm going to finally pass it back to Elsie to close the show.
The final pass back. So the one thing that I teased you on before to keep in sort of mind when we talk about the visual hierarchy is that in Keela, we give you the option of having multiple columns. So you can have 3 images in a row if you want. However, I would not recommend that. I find that, especially on mobile device, having 3 images in a row, it's not going to be good for the mobile experience. There are 2 options. Either the mobile will be, because it's such a small screen, the 3 images will be condensed so that they can fit in a row, which is terrible. The viewer can't see them. Or in Keela's case, what we do to avoid that, to ensure that accessibility parameters are maintained, is that we need to stack them. So instead of having 3 tiny images side by side, if you're viewing on a mobile, often it will be stacked so that the images can remain at the bigger size. So I think the easiest way to avoid any kind of conversions like that, or any kind of inaccessible, inaccessibility that you create for mobile viewers and for just folks in general, keep it 1 column. That way, everywhere it's going to be the guided hierarchy down, and you're going to be leading your viewers through on a journey that's really, really kind of comforting and clear and calming for them, especially when you consider that most folks are viewing your email perhaps while they're waiting for their coffee to brew, or maybe while they're on the loo. So it's just a scroll. It's a very calm scroll from top to bottom. And of course, using things like the dividers and the colored images here is what makes the different things pop. If you want to have a bunch of images, send them to your website and host your images there in a gallery. That can be a really great way to use it. I think that you'd be safe to be using smaller things, smaller blocks of text perhaps. If it's something that doesn't require folks to zoom in to see, you might be safe having multiple columns there. So that's why we do give you the option. That's just my experience in that case. Once you've created all of these templates, save them, duplicate them. I think you should have one template for every kind of email style that you use. So whether it's a weekly update, have one for your newsletter, have one for your end of year reports, and they should all come from the one kind of umbrella template, the first one that you make, and then just duplicate them. You can have as many templates in here as you want. And then take those design principles to your forms, make sure that the colors are matching there, and you've got a seamless kind of approach through all your online public facing media. Okay, now Sam did mention that at the end of this, we're going to be sending through a whole bunch of stuff. Sam, do you want to talk about the most exciting one that we're going to be sending through? Let me just bring that back. The email style guide, in fact, that you will be sending through.
Yes. So to reiterate, we are going to be sending you an email style guide and a brand guide in general for your organization. So that goes through not just the tips that we went through today, but actually all of those tips that I first mentioned. So things like your mission statement, things like your typography, your logo. So just it's a nice document. It's a nice in-house document that you can use. It's a checklist to make sure that you've got everything that you need so that your brand guide is up to date for the year and the years ahead.
Absolutely.
Again, to reiterate, this is a living document. So your brand's naturally going to evolve. You're going to mature. You're going to hire new designers, maybe new marketing people who are less angsty. And every time someone new comes in, maybe they have some feedback, maybe they want to put their flourish on it. That document should breathe and live as your organization does.
100%. Something I need to, yeah, I definitely need to go and review mine. It's very woefully out of date, I believe. Okay, well, to be honest, I didn't see a single question come through that whole time, which is usually the case whenever you talk, Sam. I think that's one kind of the highest praise that you can get as a webinar presenter is that people are engaged, you're answering folks' questions preemptively, and also that they trust that you're going to be sending follow-up material that's going to answer any of those questions, which I really love. Oh, we got one. Is there a way to add alt text to images in emails? Great question. We do not have the ability to add alt text to emails in Keela at the moment, but it's in our product board. Our product team are aware of it, and we're going to be doing an email marketing redesign in the upcoming, I don't want to say the upcoming months, because in the upcoming months, we're doing a forms redesign. Don't tell anyone I told you, but it's after that. So first up, we're doing forms. They're beautiful. I've seen the sneak peek of them. We're going to be doing donation forms first. You're not going to recognize them. And then once we've done a complete revamp of our forms, then we're moving to email marketing. And it'll be stuff like that that we're looking at for sure. So if you have any tips, like any suggestions, now's the time to get them in our product portal if you haven't added them already, because I know that our product team are collating all of those lists and going through them. So please, please, please share any feedback that you have. We love it. I saw the automation one I saw recently, their compilation of automation feedback. So it really does get used. It's cool.
And in the interim, you can also just use the caption function, which I saw Elsie had brought up. So that's a pretty much a same, at least for emails. Alt text is more on website stuff. If you're on a web page and you've got a header image in your blog, or maybe the hero image on your homepage, that's where alt text really shines.
Absolutely. Peter has asked, can one of you, it certainly won't be me, Peter, you don't want me critiquing your emails, I promise. But Sam, would you be able to not critique, but maybe give some constructive feedback to some emails from folks if they wanted to send them through to you?
Sure, absolutely. My email address is samantha.lego or sam.lego. I've got both at keela.com. So if you ever want to send me through a newsletter or a fundraising appeal, I'm more than happy to give it a look.
That would be amazing. Sam frequently performs this service for me, and I'm ever grateful for it. Oh, sorry. We have a pasta sauce in Australia that's spelled Leggo, and I'm a very big fan of that pasta sauce. And every time I type your name, I always type it with a double G.
I would like to, I'm the carb queen, so it's fair.
It's beautiful sauce. Okay, everyone. I think that's it for questions. Looks like it. But of course, you know what we are. You can always send through any questions to us. We love answering them. Look out for my email over the next 2 days. I'm going to try and get it today. But sometimes it takes a while for the cloud to download. We'll see. come along to the next webinar. Look out for the newsletter in your inbox. It's advertised there. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sam. I had a blast, as always.
So much fun.